over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. There you go. Does that look okay, Tom?
Yeah, looks good.
All right, great. Well, it is good to be with you, and we will dive into this topic. And this is a topic that I have learned over time, as this was not my formal schooling, but it is something that has become essential and necessary to the work that I do for the Great Commission, and something I have learned in process over time. So I'm going to share with you some insights and kind of give you a landscape of where we are today related to research and data in a global scape today. So Tom gave a little bit of overview of who I am, and there's my family, our 5 kids, and very thankful for each one of them, all at different stages of life, ranging from 22 down to 14 years of age, and a real blessing to us. And like Tom said, I've kind of had a full history over the last 25 years in missions, from being on the field in Ghana, West Africa, to working at in an international mission office, so a U.S. mission office, a missions pastor at a large mega church, and then being in a few other things, but being at Missio Nexus for the last 6 years. And I bring that up just because it's given me an opportunity to look at missions from different perspectives. And there are things that are very practical on a field missionary level. There are things that happen at an organizational level, and even in a church perspective, where you take and you weigh these different things. And I think that even today, as I deal with data from the missions world, that experience that only God could weave together has helped me be able to have a little bit different perspective at times. And I think one of the things we'll talk about towards the end of the presentation is just how to make data practical. And that's something that is significant to me, because I've been in those roles, and you're always looking for information, yet you want it to be practical and accessible and usable. And that's a key part of what we do with any type of data we're dealing with. Tom mentioned that I work for Missio Nexus. A lot of people don't know who Missio Nexus is. It's about a 500-member association of 350 mission agencies, about 100 churches, educational institutions, and individuals across the United States and Canada. Missio Nexus has been around for 100 years, a little over 100 years, actually. It's had a few different names along the way, so you may have known about some of our previous names, but Missio Nexus is the name since 2012. We seek to catalyze relationships, ideas, and collaboration within the Great Commission's community. And although our mandate is focused on the United States and Canada, we certainly partner with other mission associations around the globe. And there's plenty of them, and we try to interact with them. And in fact, that's something that we're passionate. Both my boss, Ted Essler, and I have been with Missio for 6 years. And going into the future, we see our leadership in partnering with global bodies like us important to help lead the way that U.S. and Canadian agencies will also partner with global counterparts around the world. So my job, I do everything from dealing with putting together events to reports and data, doing webinars, and advising mission agencies and churches and how they can be more effective in carrying out what God's called them to do. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to give a present kind of an overview of the present day of the data landscape, because I think that factors into what we're talking about. We're going to look at quantitative data research. I'm going to give you some examples and applications that will hopefully just give you an idea of how the terminology plays itself out in real life, from things that we've done at Missio Nexus, and a couple of examples of things outside of us. Talk about opportunities, challenges, and then we'll wrap up with some concluding thoughts. So the first topic here, before I dive into quantitative data, I felt it necessary to talk about big data, which is being talked about all the time. Data, roughly 60 years ago, digital computers made information readable to us. Roughly 20 years ago, the internet made data reachable so we could deal with it. 10 years ago, the first search engine crawlers made it into a single database so we could look up stuff and dive into information. And companies like Google and other like-minded companies made it possible to sift through data in a way that it was the most measured age in history, treating this massive corpus as a laboratory on the human condition. And today's kids are the children of the petabyte age. And the petabyte age is different because simply it's just more data, more than we've ever dealt with before. Kilobytes were stored on floppy disks, megabytes were stored on hard disks, terabytes in disk arrays, and petabytes are stored somewhere out there in this big cloud in the sky. And as we've moved along this progression, we went from analogies like everything's stored in a folder to it's like a filing cabinet to now it's like a library of data. In petabytes, we ran out of analogies because it's just so much data that we're trying to deal with. In fact, this cloud data is stored in massive data farms that we will probably never see and never visit. And we give our personal data and research data to other people to manage in today's world. We're not holding it oftentimes on a disk in our own office. It's just up there in the cloud that someone else is managing, and we're trusting that they're taking care of that data. So it was interesting. I was, what is 1 petabyte? It's a word. We know it's a lot of data. Well, 1 petabyte would be equal to 223,000 DVDs. So if you have a DVD sitting by your TV with a movie on it, that's about 4.7 gigabytes. You would need 223,000 of those to equal 1 petabyte. And that's the world that we live in, of just mass data. So, sorry, I need to move a screen here real fast. So in the Oracle, there's an article by Oracle out there at oracle.com talking about what is big data. And the definition of big data is that data that comes with 3 V's, they talk about it: variety, volume, and velocity. Big data is larger, more complex data sets, especially from new data sources. And the data sets are so voluminous that traditional data processing software simply can't manage them. These massive volumes of data can be used to address problems like we've never addressed them before. In fact, up the street from my house is a large data facility that holds all the data for the Chicago Stock Exchange. And it all funnels out. I live about 30 miles outside of Chicago, and all that data comes out here, out in the suburbs, out by me, and they hold it there and they deal with it. And about 20 people work in the building that's the size of a massive warehouse that you would think could hold hundreds upon hundreds of people, but 20 people manage all these data servers to deal with all this big data. So I gave you the 3 V's of big data: volume, velocity, and variety. Volume talks about the amount of data. With big data, you'll have to process high volumes of low density, unstructured data. And this can be data of unknown values, such as Twitter data feeds, click streams on a web page, a mobile app, sensor-enabled equipment. For some organizations, this could be terabytes of data. For others, it may be hundreds of petabytes. So just tons and tons of data. So we have high volume of data. We also have, in today's world, velocity. Velocity is the fast rate at which data is received and perhaps acted upon. And normally the highest velocity of data streams directly go into memory versus being written to disk. So they're just out there on these big data servers. And some internet-enabled smart products operate in real time, where they're processing data they're taking in, or near real time, and require real-time evaluation and action. So we have volume, we have velocity, and then we have variety. And variety refers to the many types of data that are accessible in a way that never has happened before. Traditional data types were structured and fit neatly into relational databases, and we all have dealt with some type of relational database, from Microsoft Access to other tools that are out there. But with the rise of big data, data comes in new unstructured data types. So it can be text or audio or video, and all these things require additional pre-processing to derive meaning and support the metadata that they collect. So it's just a whole new world right now related to data. And volume, velocity, and variety are the 3 V's that you have to remember related to this. There's all kinds of benefits to big data. we certainly can gain more complete answers because we have more information to deal with. And more complete answers mean we have more confidence in the data that we're dealing with, and it helps us to tackle problems in new and different ways. I have a friend who's actually one of the top scientists in the United States dealing with supercomputers. And there's a handful of supercomputers around the world that can take and process information at incredibly high speeds. We have one at Argonne National Laboratory that's just a few miles away from me where I live here in Chicagoland. And I've been in there and I've seen it. It's this massive computer. It's like something we would see from the 1960s that was a normal personal computer, this massive computer. But these new supercomputers process all this data so quickly. And you can throw in scientific experiments or even just data analysis on neighborhoods and people, and you can have answers in unbelievable short amount of time. One of the projects my friend worked on here in Chicago is that they created devices that they hung on almost every street corner in the city of Chicago that recorded the weather, they recorded wind, they had cameras and mics, and they were taking in all this data to try to understand the way people move and interact within the city of Chicago. And hopefully nothing nefarious with all that information they were taking in. But we also do know that with the growth of data and the ability to analyze data, there are ways now that we can know more unique things about people. And in the Christian realm, there's all kinds of ways this can be beneficial. Even just one example of Bible translation, the speed of Bible translation has increased substantially just because of the processing power of computers and be able to take base languages and put them into a computer system and algorithms run information. Even some organizations are now using artificial intelligence to help be able to take that and translate the Bible into other languages much more quickly than was ever achievable. But we also know that there are governments out there that are taking information and using it for nefarious purposes and for monitoring people. And they're taking in cell phones. There's cameras on street corners. And some countries out there that you may know of are even creating point systems for the culture and the people in that culture. And they're monitoring everything about them. And they end up giving people an individual point system on how good of a citizen they are. So there are substantial high risk with all this big data. I would say for the missions environment, my estimation is the missions world at this point in time is really not able or equipped to directly handle all this big data directly. But we can certainly utilize data analysis tools to supplement research and for finding correlating pieces of information on the data that we are dealing with. All right, so that was a little bit about big data. It kind of sets a perspective and picture of where we are and certainly where we're heading down the road. So we're going to talk a little bit right now about quantitative research. And, I want to give an overview of what quantitative research is, define it a little bit, and then I'm going to give examples of what it is. So the purpose of quantitative research is to attain greater knowledge and understanding of the world that we live in. Researchers use quantitative methods to observe situations or events that affect people. Quantitative research produces objective data that can be clearly communicated through statistics and numbers. And we do this in a scientific, systematic way so the studies can be replicated by someone else. So if I do a study, I create some kind of survey tool that anybody can go look at that survey to see where I got my data. You not only see my data, that's my end result of my study, but you can see the method that I used, and then you can go out and replicate it if you wanted to. Data from quantitative research is primarily used in 4 ways: to find patterns and averages, to make predictions, to test causal relationships, and to generalize results to wider populations. So that's kind of the summarized version of 4 main ways to use data. So a basic procedure in using quantitative data would be to make observations about something unknown, something unexplained or new. to investigate current theories or trends surrounding the problem or the issue. That would be the first step. And then you go through a process of formulating a hypothesis to explain the observations that you're taking in. You would then work to predict outcomes based on your hypothesis and formulate a plan to test your predictions. And then you're going to collect and process your data using 4 primary methods that I'm going to talk about in a minute, and then I'm going to give examples on. And lastly, if your prediction is confirmed, you verify your results, you draw final conclusions, and you present your findings. If your results, your hypothesis is not confirmed, then again, you have to start over again with the process. And you go back through and you make alterations and changes. And I can tell you there's a number of studies that we have now run for multiple years, and I'm constantly, I think that an answer will come, and I realize I have to go back and readjust the way I'm asking questions or who we're asking, not necessarily get the answer that I want, but to get information and answers that help us be more practical and applicable to the community that we're trying to give the information to. All right, so there are 4 primary methods for collecting data. 4 primary methods in processing quantitative data. Again, I'm going to explain these and give some examples in just a minute or two. First, descriptive. This method is focused on the what question. It's used to describe the current status or current circumstances of the factor being studied. Researchers using this method do not generally begin with a hypothesis, rather they develop one after collecting the data. Variables are not manipulated in this type of research, and researchers do not use the law of probability. Survey research with large data sets fall into this design category. And that's something that we regularly do at Missio Nexus. Others in the mission community do, and I'll give an example of that in just a minute. The second type is correlational data research, and this method is used to study relationships between factors, which are measured and recorded as research variables. This kind of research is used to detect trends and patterns in data. In a correlational study, variables are not manipulated, thus the results are not sufficient to establish the cause of the patterns and trends discovered. You're simply looking at and comparing data with each other. You're finding correlational information. The third type is experimental. Experimental method studies whether there is a cause and effect relationship between research variables. The researcher controls or manipulates an independent variable to measure its effect on one or more dependent variables. This kind of research is commonly used in science fields such as sociology, psychology, chemistry, physics. And typically this includes parameters such as random or non-random assignment, manipulation of variable, or even the use of a control group. And we haven't done any studies like this in Missio Nexus, but I have a couple of ideas, even our community, how experimental method could be utilized. And lastly, the fourth is comparative. This method, as it says, focuses on comparisons. Researchers study groups that are pre-existing rather than created for a study. As in experimental research, the focus is the effect of an independent variable on a dependent variable. The difference that there is either no control group, no random selection, or no manipulation variable. Comparative research can also include designs where pre-existing, archived, or past data can be used as part of that comparison data. All right, and before I go into giving you very practical examples of each of these and talking through them in a practical way, I felt it was necessary to go down one little rabbit trail for a second and talk about the difference between quantitative data research and qualitative data research, because it's pretty important, I think, for all of us to understand these and utilize both. So quantitative data research, as it says on the screen, is information about quantities and numbers. It's pretty easy to understand. Qualitative data research, in contrast, is descriptive and regards phenomenon which can be observed but not measured, such as language. So quantitative data, you're getting numbers, you're getting data. Qualitative, you're getting feedback, you're getting information. You're having someone give you a verbal narrative about what they're experiencing or what they've done. Quantitative is, on the left side, is concerned with discovering facts about social phenomena. It assumes a fixed and measurable reality. Data are collected through measuring things, and data are analyzed through numerical comparisons and statistical inferences. Whereas with qualitative data, it's concerned with understanding human behavior from the informant's perspective. It assumes even a dynamic reality in the data that we're dealing with. Data are collected through participants' observations and interviews, and data is reported in the language of the informant who provided the information. There are projects that are mostly quantitative, I would say, in the missions world. And I'm going to give a couple examples of that, but I would also say that for most of the work that I do in the missions world and that's out there, qualitative data is demanded in our environment to give a richer, more full picture of the meaning behind the data that we're collecting. We can see trends and issues with quantitative data, but I would say that qualitative data gives us heart and personalizes the data. And when we are dealing with maybe foundations or donors that want reports, they pretty much demand both quantitative and qualitative data to come back to answer, hey, I gave to a project, what's happening? If you simply just come back with some numbers and say, well, you gave to a project and let's say 500 people were baptized, that's fine, but they also want to hear the life stories of transformation that took place. Now, both quantitative and qualitative help us to have better analysis. And I think too, in light of not necessarily having all the ability to utilize big data in the missions world, when we do utilize quantitative and qualitative, it helps us get that bigger, broader picture of what's taking place. One just quick example of utilization of both of these things is for a number of years, I worked very closely with a project in northern Ghana that was doing church planting among some unreached people groups up in the north of Ghana. And we worked very diligently with the national workers who are on the ground to start tracking data, and over time develop the technique. To the point in time today, they're using cell phones, they're going to villages, they track the GPS location of where they're at, and they track information related to that. And so you track hard quantitative data like how many villages were you in, how many churches were planted, salvations, baptisms, clean water units distributed. I think we had over 20 metrics that we used that were just hard data pieces of information. But we also wanted to understand more deeply than that. Was a church planting movement happening? And so we took David Garrison and the work that he's done on church planting movements. He has 10 indicators of church planting movements, and we took those things like prayer, local leadership, multi-generational church plants. Were the people creating their own worship songs, or is there persecution taking place? And we track those things along with those other statistics to give us a more rich, full perspective. And then we still felt like that wasn't enough. And so we added on that qualitative analysis of stories and testimonies. And the stories and testimonies, I have to say, substantially made a difference in giving us clarity to what actually had impact. The qualitative stories gave a fuller picture that allowed us to even transition and change and adapt methodologies that were being used in the field. Because, you may see baptisms happening or church planting happening, but when you had the qualitative stories, we were understanding even more deeply different tools or strategies that had even a deeper impact on individual people that were trying to be released, be helped. And so it was so important to have both quantitative and qualitative data feeding and understanding the work that was taking place there over the years. So I want to move now, and I want to give some examples of the 4 different types that I talked about: descriptive, correlational, experimental, and comparative, and give you examples in a real world setting of what those terms and ideas look like in the missions world. So the first is quantitative and is descriptive. First type of quantitative is descriptive. Over the years, since the early 1950s, there's been a project called the North American Mission Handbook, which you can see one picture there on the left side of the screen. The North American Mission Handbook has taken many different forms over the years. Originally, it was simply just a directory of mission agencies in the United States and Canada. That lasted for about a decade. And then people said, well, you know what, we don't just want a directory of information. We'd like to know who these organizations are and what they're doing. So statistics started being tracked on the organizations, who they were, what they were doing, even how much money was coming into mission agencies. What did their staff look like? And over the years, those questions got more and more detailed. A number of years ago, Missio Nexus became the next stewards of the Mission Handbook, and we published the 22nd edition in 2019. And it was about a 900-page book that had a directory and it had information in it. You can go out to Amazon.com or William Carey Library, and you can purchase that handbook. It's a good piece of data. As we went into last year, it was time to update this project. And so we decided and talked to a lot of people that the day and age of a large 900-page book that cost $50 was past, that people wanted information digitally. And so just a few weeks ago, we published the next edition of this, our mission data report, and it's an all electronic report. And if you go to missionexus.org, you can pull up, if you're not a member, you can simply pull up a summary report. There's an infographic there with all kinds of data that you can look at. If you're a member of Missio Nexus, you can get all the data report and look at that. So this was a study of 367 US and Canadian mission agencies, looking at information about them. And we break things down into different categories. We look at that data between different types of mission agencies. We get information related to staffing. So here we're asking for information and organizations are providing it. How many people do you have in your home office? How many people do you have serving long-term in the field or short-term in the field? How many single men? How many single women? How many married people? We're simply taking data and looking at it. We didn't come up with a hypothesis ahead of time. We were waiting to see what the data would provide us. And as the data provides it to you, I mean, there are things, even with 367 mission agencies represented here, one thing that's to take note is that there are more women serving on the mission field than there are men. Between married couples and single women, which single women from North America always outnumber single men about 2 to 1, if not even more than that, 3 to 1. And so, you know, there's more women serving on the mission field than men. That has implications in how we care for our missionaries, or needs that we need to think about when we think about our missionaries serving on the field. Short-term field missionaries, one of the things that we had to take note of in this study was the numbers were about 3 times lower than normal just because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the way that affected short-term missions going out around the world. Even with short-term data, it's been interesting over the years seeing how trends have changed related to how long people go out into the field, when they're there, when they're not there. And we can get that type of data as we look at these types of things. We looked at where people serve. We simply asked, what region in the world do you have people serving on? And this is one of the challenges I'll talk about later at the end of the presentation, but we used to be able to ask, what country do you have missionaries serving in? And agencies pretty much aren't willing to give that information anymore because of global security issues. But we can still ask region. And these are, again, US and Canadian missionaries and where they're predominantly serving around the world. We gained this type of information. We gave information on mission activities. What are people and agencies doing? This was a question related to what is the primary activity of your mission agency? And an interesting trend over time from North American agencies is that even if you go back 10 years ago, the primary activity of evangelism and discipleship, which includes church planning and discipleship ministries, that would have been up over 50% of the agencies would have said that's their primary activity. And that has gone down to about 35% now. And that's related to a number of different factors. But again, that's now a point where we can take that information and go into a deeper level study on why that is to be after we just got this information on what is the reality. Here's another one on mission agent. We asked the question, when was your mission agency founded? In the United States, there's a lot of thinking that the majority of mission agencies were formed after World War II. Yet we have had a massive spike in the 80s and 90s with mission agencies being founded. We've done the study a couple different ways with different groups of mission agencies, and these same statistics hold up. We'll have to see what happens over the 2000s here, 2010, 2020, see if those numbers stay up. You can see a significant drop there at the end, but it's not complete data. But there's a massive spike in the 80s and 90s, and you have to ask why. Why did that happen, and what factors took place, and what could we do to continue to see mission agencies being created? So I could get into a whole list of other things related to diversity in missions. This type of information helps to expose truth. The narrative out there is that missions from North America is shrinking and going away. And I always feel like one of the jobs of getting data like this is doing some myth busting, as I call it. What is reality? What is truth? Or is it simply just a myth that is being talked about that missions is shrinking? We don't feel like missions is shrinking from North America. It may have leveled off, but from the numbers we see, God is still raising up many North American missionaries to go to the mission field. We praise God for that. We don't think it's shrinking. And that's very helpful. It's encouraging to the missions world to hear that type of information. All right, I need to move on. Time is ticking away here. Let me talk about correlational. One of the studies we did a few years ago, there was a book that was actually written called Too Good to Lose, which was done about a decade ago on the issue of missionary attrition, missionaries leaving the field. So we did a missionary study on missionary attrition a few years ago, and one of the parts of that was correlational information. And so this is probably too small for you to see the detail, but what we did was we not only wanted numbers, we not only wanted that the first aspect of descriptive data, but we also wanted correlational data. We wanted to understand why were people leaving the mission field, not that they had simply just left, but why were they leaving? And one of the ways that we try to get was, one of the things we try to do is get correlational information, which was, what was the perspective of their field leadership, of the home office leadership, and then of the individual missionary? And we wanted to compare and contrast those. And I would have to say, this study was very interesting. There was 12 mission agencies that took place, and it was extremely rare that the field leadership, the home office leadership, and the actual missionary had the same perspective on why the missionary was leaving the field. It's actually helped me be able to go back and talk to mission agencies about their processes, about their data collection. And we have seen so many implications of those three not in alignment with each other, and the way that a missionary then leaves a mission organization, and how they are doing post leaving their service to the field, their service with an organization, if there is not alignment on the understanding of why they're leaving the field. The other thing that came very clear was that a lot of organizations just don't do a great job of tracking data like this, data that would actually transform and change their processes and their member care, their ability to care for missionaries, if they simply just tracked their data better. So that's an example of a correlational study. I'm going to jump to experimental. Again, this is one that we haven't done, but I do think that there's options out there to be able to do experimental studies. And looking, I think it's in particular with church planning methodologies and what's effective in different culture, and taking and doing, utilizing different methods among similar people groups, or even, let's say, among Muslim cultures or other Buddhist cultures or different things, and trying different strategies and seeing what works and doesn't work, and why doesn't it work. If you've been in the missions world, you've heard about the C scale, the contextualization scale. And even within organizations doing some testing, this would be a great type of study on different types of church planning ministry, utilizing the contextualization scale and what has worked, what hasn't worked, and understanding the differences of those types of strategies, and being able to correlate that information together would be extremely informative to the world of missions. So that would be an example of that. Lastly would be comparative. And so every year we do a compensation study of how much are mission agency leaders getting paid, and this helps inform the health of mission agencies, how much is, money is coming into mission agencies related to what's happening in the other nonprofit sector or non-government organization sector in the United States and Canada. But it also helps mission agency leadership be more informed in making their decisions related to how much they're paying their executives. And so again, with a comparative study, we compare data from different sized organizations, the amount of revenue they bring in, or different size organizations based on the amount of staff they have and how they pay people. We compare data of what senior leaders and mission agencies are making to other nonprofit agencies around the country that may be religious or not religious, but they're nonprofit organizations. We look at it based on region where people live, and we compare it to each other. And then we also look at, we take the comparison data even with archive data from previous years, and we look at that data in comparison with each other and say, here's where we're at, here's who we are, what's changed, and what do we see in that data. So something like a compensation study is an example of comparative data. All right, that's a lot of different types of information, hopefully some practical examples that help you be able to see those 4 types being played out in different environments. I'm going to take a quick drink here, and then we're going to transition into opportunities to utilize quantitative data for the sake of global missions. My list here is, there are many, I just stopped writing because I was coming up with ideas on opportunities for us to do quantitative research in the missions world. National mission statistics, that first study I showed you on missions data from the US and Canada, that's an example of that. I get contacted every time we release that study or we talk about it. People ask all the time, hey, can we do this on a global scale? And I would love to see that happen. It would be very difficult to do for a lot of reasons I'll talk about in the challenges section in a minute. But the more we can understand about what's happening around the world in missions, it informs what we're doing and even who we're sending, what gifting and skill level we need when we send people to the mission field. And we need to understand collectively what we're doing as a global missions movement. That informs even what we do at a national level. I brought up the attrition study we did. That is always a huge issue in the missions world, no matter where you're from. If you're from Nigeria and you're sending out missionaries, for South Korea sending out missionaries, or the US and Canada, we need to understand why people go to the field, but we also need to understand why people are leaving the field so that we can care for them well and hopefully keep people serving in field ministry longer. So we always need more and better studies on attrition. I'm going to give an example here in a minute of tracking languages in Bible translation. There's an organization called Progress.Bible that's working on that. Language learning, people groups, missionary training. You can read a number of these things here on the screen. There's all kinds of issues, even of businesses missions, which is talked about a lot, especially here in North America, going out and starting and running businesses overseas, globally, either as visa platforms or to help impact even community development while you're doing church planning in a country around the world. There's all kinds of things that we can study related to the efficacy of businesses' missions, and even just, if somebody is focused on starting and running a business, how effective are they at actually doing church planning at the same time? And what are the dynamics between those things? That would be a great study. Church planning, where do we need church plants? What's happening around the world? There's an organization called Reach a Village that has started very clearly documenting church plants, where they are and where they're not, in some unreached people groups and places around the world. That type of information is hugely important. A couple ideas here. There's a secular company called Statista. They track statistics. I look at this their website all the time. I'm on their mail list because it evokes ideas within me. It helps me think about data differently. It even helps me look at even correlative information and things and questions that we should be asking in the missions world, and how that relates to things that are taking place in the non-missions world. And so even things here like vaccine rollouts around the world, we know that COVID-19 has greatly impacted global missions, our ability to send, where missionaries are, where they're going, when they leave for the field. Vaccine rollout, that's the type of thing where we could look at some comparison data of vaccine rollouts and where missionaries can get into countries and where they can't. Again, so this is good just for helping you get ideas outside of our sector to inform us in the missions world, but also look for correlative information. This is Global Passport Power. This Passport Index website you can go out and look at. Evidently, the United Arab Emirates has the most powerful passport in the world as far as your ease of being able to get into other countries. It's pretty interesting information to look at. Germany, number 2, followed by Finland, Italy. We have thought oftentimes about doing a study related to global passport power, and then who needs to be trained and who do we need to get behind for a global missions movement. If people from UAE can get in other countries, maybe we need, or for other countries, we focus some training and efforts, especially of international organizations, on those folks that have that powerful passport, just to make it easier for them to get into maybe unreached people groups or countries that are more closed to other nations. And so it can inform what we're doing. I brought up the organization that was Reach a Village. This is just a sample from one of their mapping tools. That they utilize Google Earth and Google Mapping. They plot things into the map to be able to show a country like Thailand or Cambodia. They've got some detailed information on those countries, and you can look at down to a region, the population, the number of Christians, the number of churches that are there. You can get down pretty granular in their information about what's going on in those places, and it helps. I mean, if you're thinking about going and going overseas, maybe God has called you to be a missionary in Thailand or Cambodia, there are tools today to be much more informed about where I should go, rather than just buying a ticket to Thailand and hopping on a bus and hoping you land in the right town with unreached people groups. There's all kinds of tools that we can use within our organizations to help people get to the places of greatest need and least opportunity. And lastly, I think here I mentioned progress.bible. Look what they say. Progress Bible brings together data that is vast and complex and makes sense of it. They're leveraging big data in a certain type of way related to scripture translation, and they're taking in all kinds of information about languages and scripture translation. They're working with all kinds of partner organizations to look at who's out there doing Bible translation. They partner with Wycliffe and SIL and others to understand where do we still need the scripture translated and what does that mean. And this is hugely helpful information. In fact, we're working on an infographic with them that's going to come out early next year that's going to look at the remaining languages that need to be translated and where they're at. This data helps inform organizations to be strategic, and it helps missionaries to know where they need to go to work on stuff. So again, there's all kinds of opportunities to utilize data. So let me end here. I'm getting close to the end here, talking about challenges. And there are some significant challenges. There is often a lack of willingness to participate, and that can run the spectrum from just there's some cranky people out there, unfortunately, who don't want to participate, all the way to legal and security issues that are very real. And as I have dealt with numerous projects, even that attrition study, there were organizations, legal departments that just said simply, we won't share that information because we feel it puts us at risk or puts our employees at risk, so we're not going to share it. It makes it really difficult. We have people working in very high risk places around the world, and I would love and organizations would love to have granular information on where people are actually serving. But it's very difficult to get that information in today's world because of things like security. Number 2 on that list. Security has become a huge issue, and it's affected the data that we can get. Thirdly, poor organizational practices. Most organizations don't have good practices, and they don't have streamlined or even practices that are in alignment with each other from their field or home office, or if they're an international organization, between their offices. So those organizational practices make it very difficult. A lot of mission agencies are decentralized. They don't have a head office that's dictating what everybody else does. They're decentralized, and so multiple organizations, people, they collect data differently, they label it differently, they talk about it differently. It's hard to get streamlined data from mission agencies. Different languages, and I'm not talking about English and Portuguese and Spanish. I'm talking about just the language that we use to describe things within our mission organization. When I did that attrition study, one of the reasons I only ended with 12 organizations that participated in it was because everybody used such different terminology related to their missionaries and how they labeled them, what they called them. And there's growing trends even in North America related to mission sending and what we're calling short-term, long-term, mid-term workers. All that language, all that verbiage is changing in our environment. And so you try to put out a survey and collect information, and you're constantly trying to define every question to fit everybody's category and make it work. And it is super challenging, and it's going to be hard moving forward with the constant state of change that we have to find common elements that we can gauge statistics based from because the language is so different. Again, I mentioned this briefly, but changes in the mission environment here in North America, but also the growing global missions movement affects how we're tracking and what we're tracking. And data that we used to track isn't relevant anymore, and we need to find new tools to be able to track information that is relevant in the world that we live in and into the future. Length of time to collect data. Even the example of the mission handbook that I brought up, that had been published about every 5 years. Even things like Operation World that many of us know and love and utilize, that's published every few years. Well, by the time that the publication is put out, the data isn't accurate or isn't up to date anymore. And things have changed so radically, even with the migration, the great migration of people around the globe that's happening today. Something like Operation World, within 5 years, it's a completely different landscape of where people live and where people groups are. And so we need to find ways to get data more real time. And even our effort to digitize the mission handbook, we're going to be focusing more and more on Missio Nexus members and getting data from them on an annual basis that we hope within the next couple of years, we're not just going to publish a report once a year, but we'll be able to have dashboards of data that are available in real time throughout the course of the year as organizations submit data on a more ongoing basis. And again, that helps us be more strategic in what we're doing as organizations. And we also need to breed better international connections with each other, with other mission associations, with other mission bodies that are out there. I was on a call earlier this year with a group, the African Association of Mission Agencies. And I was just shocked at the amount of data that's being collected on a national level, but also on a continental level for Africa. And it just hit me on how we need to work harder at having unity in the body of Christ and deeper international connections with each other, because we need to be learning from each other. There's data we need to be sharing that can absolutely benefit the global missions movement. So in conclusion, just some final concluding thoughts. This is the understatement of 2021. There's a great need for data and analytics. We need good study of data. We need good analytics of that data. It was reported that at least in North America, the #1 position for a C-suite level position, CEO, COO, was the Chief Analytics Officer in the for-profit world. We don't have those type of people in the missions world very often. They're usually a guy or a gal within a mission organization that has a passion for data, but we don't have someone who's assigned a role of doing analytics on data, and we need those type of people out there. There's a lot of data is accessible, and we need to be utilizing it. And I could do a whole nother lecture on the importance of metrics within mission agencies, and we need to be keeping better metrics. There's a great need to make data applicable and practical. My sub point here, if data is collected, then you need to report on the findings. There's nothing worse than going out and making people go through the effort of collecting data and then not giving them the information back on the data that you collected. And that happens more often than not. But also, I've realized in our world, people are willing to give data if you can give them very practical application back on that data. Not just simply scientific numbers and structures of data in Excel spreadsheets, but what does this mean? Help me interpret the data so I can put it to immediate use on my field or within my mission agency. There's a great need for strong organizational practices and internal champions. I've talked about that already. Again, there's a great need for willingness to think about the kingdom and not my kingdom. And even my data processes and techniques, how I use them and how that can benefit the overall global body of Christ, and how I can seek to partner and share information and not just hold that captive, but really see a benefit to the global body and what God's doing around the world. And then there's also a great need for us to create tools to get around security risk. And blockchain would be one of those. My boss, Ted Essler, is growing to be an expert in blockchain and looking at utilizing some of these new types of technology to help us in a global missions environment to share data that is secure data in a more secure way, so that we can actually work through and find out information and not be worried about security as we move into the next age. So security is a huge issue for us to be able to really have good data, good quantitative data efforts moving forward into the future. So there's my email in our association's website. Feel free to email me if you have questions or thoughts, or if there's a way I can help you. I'll do my best. Again, I am by no means an expert in this and have learned things along the way, but we are more than happy to help collaborate and work with others around the world for the sake of God's glory and the proclamation of his name. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Michael. An excellent presentation. And definitely going to use this in a couple of different ways, I think, going in the future. I think I will show this actually to some of our incoming cohorts because they're not here right now. And I put you at a difficult week, the last week of December before we go on break. But
no worries.
The one question I want to ask you, Michael, is you talked about international cooperation and you talked about how that's going on. Are there data banks that are forming now that are collecting data that can be mined by different groups around the globe? And then, of course, then you have also security issues with that. But is that beginning to take place so that people can get at data that's been collected for various things that might be involved in mission research or a mission institution understanding what they're doing versus what other people are doing, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think, and there's a couple different networks of people who are doing research out there in the missions world. I don't know of any data banks that are being collected. It is organizationally kept most of the time, or there are some entities like us, or even those who work on Operation World, or Todd Johnstone, who works on the Encyclopedia of Christianity and those types of things, where they're independently collecting data. But as far as I've heard, and there really isn't a body who is set up with the security and even the, how do I say it? I guess the respect of the global missions environment to know, hey, if I give them my data, it will be protected, it will be taken care of, and it won't be, lost or utilized in wrong ways. And so there's a good amount of skepticism out there about sharing data, which is understandable. Yet I do think that we're missing opportunities at the same time. So.
Well, it's interesting because we had a speaker a few weeks back who was talking about how Alzheimer's research is here in Oxford pools data, and then the only licensed people who are part of the consortium can join and use that. But then they share their data, and then they draw from the data, and then they do their research, and so that facilitates global understanding of Alzheimer's and treatment and what's going on. So
That's right.
we could see the same thing happening in mission a little bit. The other thing is, one thing I wanted to ask is, you guys at Mission Nexus, are you tapping into the big data, or is it just out there sitting in some warehouse? And if it is, what kind of questions do you ask it, and what kind of things are you drawing down?
Yeah, so okay, so an example would be when we did that mission data study, one of the questions we asked was related to diversity in, what's the racial and ethnic makeup of the workers of North American agencies, whether home office or field. And we actually had a little bit of a theory when we asked that question, and that was that in North America, it's predominantly white, Caucasian workers at mission agencies, and that was true. But we also then said, okay, we got the numbers. We looked at the numbers as far as African American, Black, Hispanic, Asian, white, Caucasian. We said, how does this data then compare to the United States or to Canada? So we went out and we looked at some big data sources that take that information from US Census and other tools and factor and look at diversity index. And then we compared it to the mission data index. Yeah. And so you can look at a set of numbers and just say, wow, diversity in North American missions is really bad. And we would like to see it change. We want to see all people going to all nations. But at the same time, we looked at the data and we saw that it correlated to actually what ethnic groups and racial groups were made up in the United States. So minorities are minorities, majorities are majorities, and it helps us just have a little bit more level perspective as we deal with that data. Yeah. So that's one example. So we go out and look at it for correlative information.
If you want to ask a question, Michael, just go down to the bottom and there's a little button called reactions, and go ahead and click that, and then it's a raise hand in that regard. Another question I had for you, Michael, while we're going forward is, how do clients contact you in this, and how do they set up, what we need to know is this, all right? How does that work?
Yeah, well, we don't necessarily work that way. We come up with enough things to research on our own that we don't have the time to outsource other stuff. We do work in partnership with mission agencies. And so one of the things, if you went to our website, there's a thing called Missio Graphics, missiographics.com, which are infographics about missions. And we work in partnership. So we just worked with Global Gates, and we did a series of Missio Graphics on diaspora in North America, and try to help people be able to take their data that Global Gates is getting and be able to put it in a perspective that churches and individuals could say, okay, hey, I want to move to LA. What's the diaspora makeup? Who's there? And give an overview for that. So we do work, or with Progress Bible on their tracking of translation information. We work in partnership. I guess the only other thing I would say is I am always open with a number of the studies we do. Every 3 years, we do a study on CEOs. We do a study on church mission pastors. We do different studies. And I'm always open to people saying, hey, I have a question that no one is answering that fits really well into that study. Yeah. And then I will adapt my questions in the study to try to be able to answer those things that would be helpful to the overall body.
So what that strikes me, just kind of reading between the lines, is Missio Nexus has always been kind of a nexus of mission agencies. And so was it formed in its original founding, which is pretty old now, I've been here for a while, to be kind of an information source for the different, and then those partners through time have continued on, and it's developed into our modern era where we have all kinds of access and data banks that's much larger.
Yeah, pretty much. In originality, it was, hey, we have a community of mission agencies out there. We need to be leaning into each other. We need to be praying for each other. We need to be supporting each other. And as time moved on from 102 years ago, we realized the greater need for each other, the greater need that we could be getting our financial officers together and helping them understand best practices and engaging with each other. And there are other organizations like in the United States, the Evangelical Council for Financial Activity was created out of that. Yeah. And, and was a tool to be able to say, hey, we're going to be the watchdog for the finances of mission agencies, so the US government doesn't feel a need to be able to do that. And so there have been things like that that have been created over time and have become their own independent organizations at this point in time.
Okay, in terms of members, do they go in, if they're a member organization, they come in, do they come in and look at your library of studies and then take it down like a book, or is it pigeonholed only for them, for what they wanted to do, but not more generally available?
Great question. We're actually in an overused 2020 word, a pivot. We're in a pivot point as an organization. And so at this point in time, if your organization is a member of Missio Nexus, everybody in your organization has access to everything in our repository, webinars, audio, video, research projects, all that kind of stuff. It's all available for people to be able to utilize. As we move into next year, we are actually relaunching our website to do a couple things. Number one, to get people more connected to their affinity in the missions world. Yeah. So if you're a chief financial officer, you're going to get into that website, you're going to be connected to that community more quickly. If you're a field practitioner, you're going to be connected to that world more quickly. And then what we hope from there to do is to be more of a platform for our members to be able to activate and do the things they need to do and not be hindered by our staff of 6, only being able to do so many things, but also be able to evoke the community to be able to launch out on projects and information together. And I think we're going to see a lot more cross-pollination and sharing as we create a platform for people to be able to do that in a very secure way among each other.
That's really helpful. I'm just going to keep going since I'm not going over my handwriting. The other thing that's really interesting in this, and this is one of these terms, in fact, we had a whole series on this, on polycentric mission. So one of the things that the big sea change in mission has been a recognition that mission is now going on in countries all over the world and in different ways. It would seem to me that Missio Nexus was formed on a more traditional model of how missions developed in the Western world, of west to the rest. So the nexus would be in Aurora, Illinois, and go out from there. But now you have nexuses in Singapore, you have nexuses in Beijing, you have nexuses in Australia or wherever. What are you guys doing to build things like you in different places in the world? Because yes, data is data, and there's not necessarily data that's ethnically Chinese, right? Or there could be, in terms of collecting that. But it also has to do with perspective of what's important. What do we look at? What, that kind of thing. Is there any movement that way to be able to say, hey, maybe if we had 10 centers with people who are asking different kind of questions in Singapore or Indonesia or Nairobi, that kind of thing. Is any of that kind of conversation going on?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. Hopefully, I got 3 or 4 thoughts on that one. Number one, there really isn't a need for us to go out and help start other associations because they're already starting. And they kind of rise up. One of my good friends is Ray Mensah, who's the head of the Ghana Evangelical Mission Association. So the Missio Nexus of Ghana, West Africa. Right. They're tracking all kinds of data information already. There's associations in India, in Nigeria, in South Korea, other places where they've already, just like it happened to us 102 years ago, they came together in their country and said, hey, we need to be cooperative with each other. We need to be helpful. It can help service. And they're already doing that. I think the thing that needs to happen is somebody needs to take intentionality in bringing people together. And that's one of the things that we feel called about in North America in particular, is that we can be the convener of people. And we're feeling more and more like on a global scale. Now, the World Evangelical Alliance Mission Commission, which Jay Matenga from New Zealand, a friend of mine, is in charge of that. They do some work at that and trying to bring together, again, with COVID over the last couple of years, haven't been able to have the meetings that have normally taken place. But there's a lot more that could be done, especially on sharing data and information,
Right.
not just getting leaders together to talk, which is good. It builds unity, but, you know, kind of a step or two down where we get into more specific in data. I know just from, you know, anecdotal conversations I've had when I've been overseas at conferences and different things, there are people out there collecting data even better in other countries than we ever have in North America. And there's a lot that we can learn from some of these global associations and what they're collecting and how they're going about doing it. But there's mutual learning that needs to take place that we're not maximizing yet. And I really pray and hope that that would be in the next decade, just with technology, maybe even using things like blockchain that gives us security at a whole new level. That we can see better, broader global cooperation related to global missions.
Just a very detailed question is, what's blockchain? Sounds like
That's
something that you get arrested with.
That's a whole nother lecture series that you need to get my boss to speak about. But
it's a way of protecting data and scrambling.
That's right.
Other people.
That's right. Cryptocurrency around the world uses blockchain technology. And that's the primary use of blockchain today, is for transferring and utilizing cryptocurrency. But there's a whole nother framework for it that allows end-to-end security related to data transmission, where you know who has looked at it and when they've looked at it, and everything is logged and filed. So you're really able to protect information and protect the everything about that information.
Well, that's very good. Well, thank you, Michael. This is all very, very interesting. My only comment on the last comment just came to my mind is also not just bringing together, but also triangulating. The data pinging back from corners, and I think back of the whole thought pattern of flat Earth, and how that works in terms of these groups that form and deal with things where they're in common practice or looking at the same information. Anyway, Michael, it was an excellent talk. Again, I put you on the wrong date on December 16th, but we will use this again and again and again. Blessings on your ministry there. It's so important, and learned a lot today. And I want to get this in front of our students too, to look at this going forward. And so with that, thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon in Aurora, Illinois, and a lovely place to earth. Enjoy that 68-degree weather.
I totally will.
All right, so Merry Christmas and
Merry
blessings.
Christmas.
And thank you all for joining. And I will
Bye-bye.
close the meeting there.